Welcome to the Human Tell podcast, where category leading insights professionals share a little bit about what we're learning here at Human Tell. Hosted by Lolita Morrow, each episode features voices from industry leaders in sports, media, food, and travel, exploring the why that informs how consumers think, feel, and act. Join us as we connect the dots between data and real life. Here's today's episode. Welcome to the Human Tell podcast. I'm your host, Lolita Morrow. So, is leisure travel on the upswing? Are consumers doubling down on travel as a valued experience? The last time I decided on an impromptu leisure vacation, I chose to throw a dart at the wall map in my kitchen. And wherever it landed, that's where I would go. So I had to spend the next 7 days on my living room floor. I don't have a very good aim. Well, I hope you brought your luggage today because we have a lot to unpack. Our discussion today is centered around the August 2025 exploration conducted by our travel group among over 4,000 American travelers, which examined people's outlooks towards leisure travel in 2026. The work explored the relative importance of economic and infrastructure concerns among the various issues we face today, the specific concerns people have about traveling in light of current events, and what they are likely to do in the event of an economic downturn. Today, I am joined by Maria Henson, a member of our travel leadership group who helped develop this study. Maria is a travel intelligence leader who currently serves as head of insights for Visit Orlando, the destination marketing organization for America's #1 tourist destination. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Great to be here, Lolita.
Excellent. We are happy to have you. Now, Maria and I are joined by Dr. Jennie Germann Molz, a professor of sociology at Holy Cross University. Jennie has spent her career studying travel motivations, families, and overall travel, and mostly recently, digital nomads. Jennie is the co-editor of the Journal of Hospitality and Society. Welcome, Jennie.
Hi, Lolita. Hi, Maria. It's great to join you.
Did you hear my joke earlier that I hope they brought their luggage because we have a lot to unpack?
Yes,
Did
all
you
your
get
jokes were very funny.
Thank you. Thank you. See, already, I love it. So let's jump into this. First, let's start talking about the current state of travel. So at Human Tell, the study that we fielded last month showed that for the most part, people who travel are not intending to pull back on travel. In fact, whether we considered men, women, different age groups, or ethnicities, approximately 80% of the people we surveyed expressed either very high excitement or at least cautious optimism about traveling in 2026. I'll throw this to you first, Maria. What do you think about that? And how does it compare, I guess, to the other things that you're seeing in travel planning?
Sounds great. Great question. I was thinking about this as we're actually going through developing the study. One of the things that are so important, particularly for organization like mine, which is destination marketing organization, is to be grounded at all times in the parameters that you're functioning under. Because what's going on here in market may be different and unique, but you still cannot get away from all the overarching themes that are taking place in the country, in the world. And we have seen a very similar sentiment from our American traveler. There is a lot of desire and a lot of passion for travel. And the reason for that is, I mean, if you look at the travel category in general, going back time and time again, it's one of the most resilient ones. If you go back to 2001, right, September 11th, you have recession. What is really coming out strong out of that unfortunate event? People want to travel. They're taking that right back. When you look at the Great Recession, same thing. Yes, there was huge economic downturn, a lot of challenges there, but travel was one of those first categories that comes back. And I think that got even more pronounced during the pandemic when we were locked up for an incredibly large amount of time, and it's not anymore a privilege, it's a right, and a consumer, particularly the US consumer, is not willing to give it back or give it up.
You mentioned that resiliency. Why do you think travel seems to be so resilient as compared to other spending categories? I mean, even in these challenging times.
It's about emotion. It's about making memories. It's about building connections. And you cannot get away from that. As a human being, that's what we're about. And we were doing some research because we're actually just relaunched a new version of our marketing campaign. And it's all about moments in between. Because what we're seeing is there's a lot of loneliness that's taking place in the society. If you listen to some other podcasts and topics, the levels of feeling alone, looking for that connection, and what is the better way to get to that if not travel? I think that is part coming from it. It's coming from the heart. It's coming from the soul. Not so much maybe that reasoning type of thing. It's a connection that we're just striving for.
Jenny, I'd love to get your POV. We also observe that just over 50% of the individuals with travel plans, they did intend to spend more. But in a way, it almost seems counterintuitive when you think about all the economic indicators that we see. Um, why do you think this is? I mean, are we just hard pressed to enjoy ourselves and have a leisure moment that we're not even concerned about cost?
I think I agree with Maria. I think that tourists, travelers have come to see travel and movement as a right, which is there. There's even been movements in Europe to declare travel as a human right, and so I think people are taking that right. I think also following on what Maria was saying, I think motivations have kind of shifted. I think in like the 1980s and 1990s, we saw tourist motivation was often about tourism and travel as a status symbol. But in the 2000s, travel has become more about experience, creating memories, and making connections with friends and family, making connections with places, but also a kind of self-actualization. And so I'm not sure if you can really put a price on that. And that's coming from the consumer side of the equation. From the industry side of the equation, part of the reason travel is so resilient is because the travel industry is just so massive. It's arguably, depending on how you measure it, it's one of the largest industries in the world, and 10% of workers in the world work in the tourism and hospitality sector, and many communities are almost entirely reliant on tourism. So there are a lot of people invested in making sure that this is a resilient industry, whether it's coming from the tourist motivation side or the industry's motivation.
When we talk about spending more, do either of you have insight into what they're actually spending on? Are they spending more on upgrading accommodations or booking more activities or extra days? Does it fall into a certain silo?
I can speak from my perspective. And Jenny, thank you for introducing the whole concept of outside of leisure, because the meeting and convention side of tourism industry or travel industry is expensive, it is important, and it does allow bringing businesses and partnerships and connections. It was quite clear that virtual meetings were not going to replace that value of that in-person connection that can take place while you're sitting there having that conversation, whether it be at lunch, dinner, or at a large meeting in the ballroom. But what they're spending on, it really depends. And I think we're probably going to go into some of this a little bit later, but it's about who you are and where you're coming from and what you're looking for from a trip. Every trip is different. You're looking for different type of connection, different type of experience. And it's really interesting to see that even our guests who may not be coming from the most affluent population are willing to splurge and behave very differently from what they do in their everyday life, because travel allows them to be almost a little bit of a somebody else. They're jumping on the experience. They're jumping on opportunity to meet new people, do things that they may never maybe would have done at home because there's not an opportunity to do that here. So it really depends. I mean, some do splurge on accommodation, some will splurge on some of those a little bit more of a luxury experience of a spa or going to a really fancy restaurant. But it doesn't have to be all of those little things. It's something that really is meaningful to you and the travel party that you're with.
I think about traveling with my family, and you said something, Maria, that was really true. It's that moment where you almost feel like you're someone else and you just want to escape. So that sort of splurging is something that you really, I guess, make a budget for because you say, hey, we're on vacation. Let's just do this one time. Jennie, that actually goes into my next thought about travel and families. So you study families and travel quite a bit. We did see in our data that parents of children that are under 18 were probably the most enthusiastic about travel in 2025. And over 50% reported that they were very excited about travel in the upcoming year in 2026. So, that being said, what have you learned in your work about this and sort of what drives that enthusiasm amongst this particular group?
I think there are different ways of looking at this. I study families who travel as their lifestyle. So I study world schooling families and digital nomad families who actually, take their kids out of school, sell their houses and live on the road and educate their kids while traveling. So there is a lifestyle motivation for those families in particular. But I'm guessing I suspect that the enthusiasm that we see among this demographic could stem from broader trends in parenting culture. We are kind of seeing the evolution of what Sharon Hayes back in the 1990s called intensive mothering or intensive parenting. And that was this idea that families have become very child focused. And Annette Leroux was a sociologist who later studied middle class families, and she argued that they were really pursuing a kind of they saw their kids as projects, and so they liked to buy into what she called concerted cultivation. And at the time, she was talking about families trying to develop their children academically and socially so they could be successful later on in life, and doing that by intervening quite a bit in their schooling experience and also their extracurricular experience. I think parents today, especially as we see Gen Y or millennial parents taking up some of these trends, that travel becomes kind of like an extracurricular activity, right? A way of developing family, performing family in a particular way, and also giving children experiences that may benefit them later in life. And so it could be that, that parents see travel as part of their children's education. Could also be that intensive parenting is extremely exhausting. And so some of these parents may be excited about traveling because they suspect they might get a little break, although in my experience, intensive parenting never really gets a holiday.
I agree with that. And
I do.
I was just thinking, Maria, about the sort of these multi-generational trips, these big trips where grandparents and parents and all the kids are traveling together. I know you obviously have a very family friendly vibe from all the theme parks in Orlando. Is that something that you see a lot more of?
I wish I saw more of that
Okay.
because we know that when the multi-generational trip happens, it's a larger spend. And
Mhm.
selfishly, Orlando would love to generate as much spend as we
Yes.
possibly can for the benefit of the local economy and community, of course. But it's probably still not as much as maybe is being talked as a trend. I think there's a lot of trends that elevate themselves and they become so fun and so exciting. Everybody gets into it. But when you really measure, when you dig in, when you pull that, I usually don't pull an onion apart, I pull an artichoke apart because there's something in the middle. So when you
Okay.
pull that artichoke apart, it's really, we still have a lot more to go. There's still a lot more opportunity. But to go back to Jenny, I loved the intensive parenting and being exhausted. I can relate to that. I think some of it could be so much more basic. We only have about what 12, what is it, 12 summers, 13 summers that you have with your child. And we're actually seeing this. I think we might be touching on it a little bit later, but since we're talking about families, Canadians are a little miffed right now, right? Let's use a very cautious term about traveling to the United States. But what we are finding is those with under 18 and really under 15 at home are a lot more insulated from that emotional, that sentiment, that negativity that's happening, because they literally cannot afford to lose years of time with their children, and being able to give them the experiences that are appropriate at any given age, and experience that joy and seeing that face and seeing the emotion and those, remember those moments in between I was talking about earlier. We're lucky in Orlando that we can actually benefit from that desire for that connection and driving those experiences for their kids.
And then what role, I guess, does affordability really play? I mean, are destinations starting to adapt their offerings, I guess, to make trips easier? So I know that there's kid-friendly amenities or more flexible bookings. Are they transitioning or offering more options for families who may have an issue with price or worried about how affordable the trips will be?
Jenny, I'm going to let you answer that question first. I'm curious where you sit on that.
So I don't know if my perspective is going to be what you expect, but the families that I study are using a strategy called geo arbitrage. And what this is they are going to places that have low cost of living because they can afford to do the kinds of family-friendly activities. They can afford to stay in larger accommodations. They can afford to hire childcare as part of their trip in destinations where those kind of day-to-day costs are lower, while earning an income in a strong currency like in the US or in Western Europe. So I'm mostly looking at families who are traveling internationally, but they're also doing it domestically as well, looking to travel to or relocate to places that are generally cheaper on those day-to-day basic items that you need to raise a family.
That's really interesting. That's a fascinating topic. I was reading about your work a little bit earlier. I mean, we're probably in a very unique, different boat because we are who we are, and the brands that we have in this destination, um, and the experiences that we have do require a certain level, I think, of spend, and it is definitely a challenge. That how do you balance the still be the destination that can be that rite of passage for younger family, the family that's maybe just entering that life cycle, and still deliver those experiences and provide the ability to have those experiences while also dealing with the inflation and the business and the labor costs and all of those things. And as a DMO, destination marketing organization, we're kind of in that strange spot because we market the destination, but we do not control the product, we do not control the service, we do not control the price. And it's that strange space of kind of bringing those pieces together, and messaging to the audiences in the way that obviously is relatable. But affordability is becoming a challenge, Lolita. It's definitely and it's not just in the United States, and it's I think it's across the board. Inflation. I mean, we're looking at some of the costs of the hotels, and that's just not in Orlando, that across the nation. I mean, from 2019 to 2024, you're looking at sometimes up to 40% increases in hotel rates. I mean, that is astounding. Yes, it's not adjusted for inflation, but there it is, right? We're not adjusting our incomes and to inflation, unfortunately. So it is definitely a challenge, and I think there's a lot of creative thinking that's happening at destination level, at a business level, because we do want to make sure that the destination can welcome all. It can be affordable for as many as possible to be able to give the amazing experiences we have here to the entire community out there.
That's great. I think about the arc of affordability, and I guess the picture isn't always rosy. There are people that are cutting back and even eliminating travel. In our survey, we saw that about 30% of people who travel were planning to cut back on travel or just not even travel at all. And then among those people, there were a variety of factors that influenced their decisions to cut back on travel. Um, a few numbers I'd like to just rattle off. I think 64% of people cutting back on travel cited rising hotel costs. And then we had 61% that said the airfare costs were very influential in their decision. Um, 60% cited gas, of course. And then a little over half, 55%, cited that dining and attraction costs were reasons for them to cut back. So, clearly there's a perception of inflation that's impacting some people's habits. Um, is that you're seeing some of that in your world as well, Maria, I would imagine?
Yes, that is definitely the case. That is something that we really try to understand. When there is a bit of an economic slowdown, and we're starting to see it a little bit more as we go through the year, there is always a question, I think that's from the industry in general. If consumer starts making adjustments to their travel plans, what are they going to actually look like? And thankfully, what we're finding is, and I think that's what the study that HumanTel just conducted supported it, that there is not necessarily that drive to completely eliminate travel. We just talked about how important it is, and it's a right that consumer chooses to execute, right? And to go ahead and take that trip and have experience. But how consumer is choosing to work within the budget and their limitations that they may have. And we're seeing very similar things. So yes, it's maybe shortening the trip, maybe choosing a destination that's going to be closer to home, maybe not splurging as much as you initially planned on. But the good news is they're still traveling, and that's really what's important for the industries. Make sure those trips are still taking place.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that? Because this kind of takes us back to the question we were talking about earlier about the resilience of tourism. And if we remember back to the recession of 2007, 2008, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a trend that we called the staycation, became really popular around that time.
Yes.
And so this was people definitely cutting back on spending on travel and not traveling and staying at home. Sorry, I was hearing a weird noise. Shall I continue?
Yes. I thought you were
Okay.
starting your own staycation. I said,
I know. I don't know what that was. The idea here was not that people were rejecting travel and tourism. They wanted to be traveling. They wanted to be on holiday. They just couldn't afford it at that time. And so the staycation kind of became that holding pattern while waiting. We saw the same thing during COVID. That was more of an enforced waiting. But there's this sense that when things do slow down in the travel and tourism industry, it's often a not a rejection of travel and tourism, but sort of waiting for the conditions to be right again to travel again.
right. I think even looking outside of price and Maria, now what did you say? Peel back the artichoke? I like that. So peeling back the artichoke, I think if we look at safety, I think that's another area that we've um, talked about where people are concerned. We have 43% that have concerns about infectious disease and public health. You just spoke about that. So safety is something that's very important. And then we think about behaviors. 35% said they were concerned about unruly, disruptive behaviors by other travelers, or even the risk of discrimination or hostility at their vacation destination. So I'd love to get both of your vantage points on that. I mean, from a safety perspective, even though we're no longer dealing as actively with COVID as we were, people are still concerned about that. And in addition to that, there is the risk of discrimination and hostility depending on the destination. Either one of you feel free to jump in right there.
I think maybe add on that, and
Yeah.
safety is definitely something that at a DMO level we call it it's a cost of entry. If you as a destination, no matter what it is, a country or a town or a village or a city of a large proportions, if you cannot guarantee your visitor that they will have a safe experience in terms of their personal safety, then you really unfortunately cannot play in this in the space. However, safety and I think the perception of safety, to your point, Lolita, it's now such a comprehensive category. There's so many things that are going into defining what personal safety when traveling is. And I think all of the destination at one point or another are kind of faced with some of those challenges. And that is something that all of us are very conscious of. And we want to make sure that, for instance, Orlando, we have a campaign that we put out there is Orlando for All. And that really covers a lot of the segments and the niche travel and, looking at just being perceived. It doesn't matter who you are, right? We welcome all of our visitors. It doesn't matter where you're from, how old you are, what ethnic background you're coming from, what's going on in your life. You're welcome here. But it's very difficult to combat that when you're messaging, because when you're trying to come out too loud and too in your face, then you're trying too hard. And consumer is pretty smart these days. There's a lot going on that they can really read between the lines. So it's a very complex subject. It's definitely something that we're constantly battling with and constantly keeping a finger on the pulse of that and understanding where we are in terms of that space and what does that look like for consumers of different backgrounds and different segments.
Jennie, in terms of safety and then also, concerned about discrimination or hostility, we do know that about 4 in 10 of those same groups say that they're cutting back or eliminating travel because there's a concern about over tourism. Can you share from your learnings about this, the over tourism?
Sure, I can say something about that. I wanted to kind of step back and put this conversation in a little bit more perspective, though, because tourism has always, the motivations around tourism have always sat at this intersection between novelty and familiarity, between risk and excitement and safety. And so we can't say that tourists necessarily want to be completely safe. Obviously, the families that I study, safety is a huge concern for them. But there are a lot of niche tourism sectors where people kind of want to go to risky places. There's forms of dark tourism, war zone tourism. So we can't sort of paint all tourists with the same brush around that. I'd say we have to put those onto a spectrum. The concerns around over tourism, to go back to your question, are kind of intertwined also with some of the infrastructural and industry structures that we see. So, for example, a lot of the places that suffer from over tourism are places that are also on the cruise ship itineraries, for example, or that become hyper popular because of social media. And there's kind of like a cost benefit analysis, right? So at some point they become so crowded that they no longer serve the purpose that they originally became popular for. So the fact that tourists in your study are even citing over tourism as a potential problem is really, really interesting, to think that they are sort of self-aware about their own impact on these places. And we've seen a lot of destinations also fighting back against over tourism. Barcelona had a lot of activists who were graffitiing tourist buses and really quite hostile, to put it in your terms, Lolita, against the tourists coming in, especially cruise passengers.
Do you think that we might see a shift towards more micro travel or sort of closer to home? I wonder how large these concerns are, and if they are large enough, will it cause a family to say, well, instead of this large trip to Barcelona, maybe we'll do something a little closer to home that hits some of those goals that we want without compromising our, safety.
Absolutely. The families that I've been studying, especially the digital nomad families that I've been studying, are doing exactly that. They are avoiding the big popular destinations and looking for smaller towns, places where the kids can kind of have more freedom, more independence, and which goes back again to the safety question, which for families, let me be clear, for families is still very key. Um, and more rural and remote destinations as well.
I'm pausing because I want to pose this to both of you because we talked about social media, and I can't help but think about social media and the impact of current events, right? So if we talk about news and current events in 2025, you simply just can't look away, right? No matter how hard some of us try. And we wondered how impactful current events are on people's travel planning. And I think one thing that really surprised me was that not very many people reported that coverage of travel and travel experiences in the news or even on their social media feed decreased their desire to travel. And I'm curious if this surprised either of you.
I mean, from our perspective, I think it's a definition of social media feed. We
Mhm.
know that a lot of consumers are using social media for their news consumption. And, depending on which side of this you are, whether you approve of it or not, it is the fact of life. And I think what we're finding is that yes, consumer is pretty smart. They can read between the lines. They understand the big story. We do feel that social media does sensationalize a lot of the media, just like the regular news does, and the impact of events is it's definitely there. It really depends, I guess, on the scope of the event. Is it something localized? Is it something national coverage? Is it something that literally is getting national and global awareness? I think that is something that is going to play back very differently in the destination. And I'm speaking purely from a single destination perspective, but I do have partners in the industry all over the country who are speaking of some other ones that do suffer from over tourism. It's definitely a challenge, and consumers are paying attention. But what we're finding is that it depends on how long term is the impact of that particular coverage is on the travel. And that is where the challenge comes in, because sometimes something happens, it's an emotional, it connects, but then it passes pretty quickly. And then there are some events that just linger because they really connect at a different level. And if social media carries that tone and that storyline forward, it's very difficult to get away from the news and the rhetoric that is just being perpetuated, because we are now talking in our own individual social channels. And I'm not going to give the examples here because I have to kind of stay a little bit on the neutral side of things here. But
Mhm.
it can be challenging, and you have to manage. And there's why we have an entire team that is dedicated to just the social media aspect of the life right now when it comes to tourism and travel.
Jenny, you have anything to add?
Well, I think it's really difficult to say this is how social media is impacting tourism or tourism motivation
Right.
because, well, for one thing, every tourist is living in their own algorithm, right? And so what people are getting is being reinforced by what they're looking for. So social media is covering all kinds of trends, not just what's happening geopolitically or in a particular destination, but also all of the travel influencer impact around that, like the Instagram trends I was talking about, right? Like I have to go have my picture taken at this specific spot, and when you get there is a line of other tourists waiting to have their picture in that exact spot as well, could offset any other negative coverage of that particular place, right? So you've got all of that happening at the same time. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was going to make another point there, but
No,
But I
no.
love though what you said, Jenny, because I know we're talking a little bit about negative, so it's negative news coverage if there's something negative, but influences are a power right now. And it's really about, I think what social media did introduce for us is the power of authentic. Now, we can argue probably for another hour what authentic means now in
Mhm.
social media, but telling that story from a first person view that is not corporation, that is not even a destination, but really telling that story from a unique perspective of an individual that I maybe relate to, or I somehow, cherish their opinion for whatever reasons. But for us, influencer is a huge category that we definitely, and that is leisure, business, domestic, international, it doesn't matter. That is definitely a channel that is driving that positive force on the storytelling for the destination.
Yeah.
thank you, Maria, because that made me remember my third point, which is that what a lot of these travel influencers also do is teach their viewers how to travel in that place, which often includes how to handle the risks or some of the other things that might be going on at the time. For example, you had mentioned discrimination earlier, Lolita, and some of the digital nomads I follow teach their viewers exactly where to go and how to be there. For example, if you're worried about racial discrimination or gender and sexuality discrimination, where do you go? Which restaurants do you go to? How do you kind of navigate that place in a way that's going to feel good and safe for you?
I do agree that the influencer network is definitely more advantageous. It's a way to show through authentic representation, to your point. If there's an influencer that you trust or someone that you follow, and they're in this place and they're showing you different hotels, places to see, things to visit, the trust is increased, and it's almost through that influencer network. And I think that is another layer that we can add sort of going into travel for next year into 2026. I wanted to share a couple things that we did learn that were really important about choosing destinations um, for 2026. Uh, One of the things that we saw is about 3 in 4 travelers, they did say they perceived safety and, local crime with low crime rates was important, but 69% are looking for a destination that has this respectful reputation, respectful tourist behavior. And I've seen that sometimes through these influencer channels, to your point, when they're actually there in that place, which leads to the third number that we have here, that 62% look for destinations that are socially stable and politically stable. Now, that's a lot to unpack there. So we know that safety and predictability is important for everyone. But I think about layering that safety, that predictability with, here's an influencer that I trust, along with what am I seeing in social media, along with what am I hearing in the news and in current events. Um, it's not as simple as it used to be, and especially when you do have a family to think about and their safety. So I'm very encouraged, especially Maria, what your organization is doing, and Jenny, some of the research that you are showing, where we have places to go to make those decisions. And even though there's so many buckets now between affordability and safety and current events, we can continue to plan travel in 2026 and sort of move the needle for relaxation and just growth and learning with our families. Which reminds me, I need to book my family vacation. I just thought of that while I was talking. Um, so I want to just continue on. So we also ask people about whether or not a destination seemed to align with their values. and did that impact their decision making? So I want to throw a couple of facts out for you both and get your feedback. So 42% of all travelers said that they would prioritize visiting US states that shared their political and social values. And then 35% of all travelers said that they would avoid visiting US states that shared their political and social values. So interesting to get your take on that.
Jenny, I'm going to let you go because that's a sensitive topic for me being in Orlando.
I was wondering what you were seeing there, Maria.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you.
Yeah, I have to say, I thought this was I thought this was a very interesting question to pose in the survey, and I thought that the feedback was really interesting as well. As I said earlier, it strikes me as being at that intersection of novelty and familiarity, right?
Mhm.
So tourism is often about going somewhere to see and experience something that you've never seen or experienced before. And yet, in the past couple of decades, we have seen tourists gravitating more toward wanting familiarity, comfort. I think this was also a little bit behind the popularity of Airbnb, for example, to go away from your home, but then live in someone else's home, right? Or to live someone else's local life was not so much about having this really drastically different experience of a different place or a different culture or a different worldview, but rather having this more subtle, comfortable, kind of de-exoticized form of tourism. So the fact that people are now factoring in social values and alignment with their social values and political values as well as part of their destination choice is interesting because it could fall on either side of that continuum.
Right.
It could be sort of like traveling to see or to experience a different kind of political or social mindset, or it could be going to some place where you feel safe and comfortable. On the latter side, I think for some travelers, especially travelers who are vulnerable for whatever reason, it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I wonder if it's more becoming sort of like a physical manifestation of the echo chambers that a lot of us live in.
I mean, that is it's a it's an interesting topic, and it's something that has, I think, come to life on our side of business, probably more since 2019, maybe 2020. And you do see that people are truly not just voting for, elections, but they're voting with their dollar, with their time when it comes to travel. And it is sometimes disheartening to us when travel becomes a weapon for somebody to drive their political statement or whatever statement it might be, right? So the weaponization of travel is just something that is painful because what is happening is, yes, while we're making those choices based on our values or whatever that might be, whatever alignment that you're going with, but you are hurting the community that you are choosing to abandon because of those values. And sometimes it really, there's clearly a misalignment, and you really do not want to be in the place where you really feel that you do not belong, which is really sad in itself. But it is definitely a very sensitive subject, and it's something that is very heartbreaking. And we know that it's not personal, but it's difficult to not take it personal when people are speaking of social media, right, talking about destination in a way that's just heartbreaking. And knowing, being here, being part of the community, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody, right, around the United States. When you're part of that community, you love it so much and you're so passionate for it, and you know what it can bring to a visitor and what connections we can make. And being able to overcome that discontent and that lack of union is definitely, it feels great when you can, I can tell you that for us, I mean, I know the study went really on the leisure side of things, and that is the beast. That is the drive, right? That is the majority of the travel. But when you look at the meetings and conventions, that is where there's a lot of that power. You know, if I'm not going to bring my group because I feel that the values of the destinations are not aligning with 20,000 to
I wonder, do you think this is a temporary
it is
phenomenon
it's
that's
definitely
sort of, is this temporary that's sort of tied to the political climate, or is this sort of a longer term shift in travel behavior? Um,
I would like to know the answer to that because that is what we're constantly battling with.
yeah,
Is it permanent? Is it temporary? And some of it is, some of it is not.
yeah,
I mean, even when you go back to the pandemic, as we were coming out of, there were a lot of statements being made. How, okay, this is never going to change. This
mhm,
is going to be that way forever. So not true, right? We're seeing that proven again and again that that is not true. But there's some things that are definitely have completely shifted the paradigm and the way people consume travel and the way they see travel. So I'm really hoping that this whole
This if I could just jump in for a minute, but there's a parallel here as well with sustainable travel and tourism, and this idea that tourist consumers can use their travel dollars to reward places that are offering more sustainable options. I think what will likely happen both on the sustainable travel side of things and thinking about these political and social values is to see if the tourist dollar actually has the effect, like if these avoiding certain places or going to certain places actually has an effect or not. That might be part of what determines if it's a long-term or a more current situation.
yeah. I was thinking about the shift in generations here, and definitely wanted to pivot and talk about some of those generational differences. Um, and it almost changes the whole topic. We saw that a few things are just more important to younger travelers. Um, for example, about 60% of Gen Z and Gen Y, when they look at travel, they're looking at the availability of remote work amenities, right? And that's drastically increased as compared to Gen X and boomers. I won't say which one of those I fall under, but Gen X, 47%, and 31% of boomers are looking for remote work. So something like that has to really shift the travel landscape as well when these younger generations are looking for amenities such as, am I able to work remotely?
Jenny, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
I'll take this one, Maria, because this actually lines up really well with what I'm studying currently, which are digital nomads. I think the shift to remote work, the shift to online school during COVID proved what could happen, right? Proved that people could work remotely, proved that kids could learn outside of the classroom. And the digital nomad population that I study, they are in those generational cohorts for the most part. That's not to say there are also quite a few Gen X digital nomads as well. And digital nomads are basically people who can work online, and because they can do their work online, they can do it from anywhere. And
Right.
so a lot of them choose to travel around the world or move between 2 or 3 different home bases domestically or internationally while they're working. And they are, in a way, at the cutting edge of redefining or sort of rearranging work-life balance that we have been hoping for so long, but digital nomads seem to actually be putting it into practice. And like I've said before, the digital nomads are kind of the canaries in the coal mine. So we see what they're doing, gives us a lot of clues about what travelers coming kind of in behind that trend are likely to be doing. So it doesn't surprise me at all that those generation cohorts, Gen X and Gen Z, want to be able to work while traveling.
Another thing that came up as important for these younger travelers, and I guess is likely evolving fast, 40% of the younger travelers are also considering the availability of these AI-based tools, such as, navigation, planning, translation, in their travel planning. And it's coming up roughly twice that of their older peers. Um, how do you feel that AI is sort of changing the way people think about plan and travel?
That is a an amazing question. It is extremely complex question, and I think we're figuring out this as we go. And what we're saying right now is probably going to be outdated like 30 seconds after I said this. And that
Mhm.
is the scary part of it, is how fast AI is moving and how fast it just became a part of everything that we do. We had virtual reality and everybody kind of got really excited about virtual reality. Everything was virtual. Everybody was going on virtual trips, right? That kind of is there, but not to a degree that AI is really coming in and entering every aspect of your life. And when it comes to travel, I literally just read an article this morning how when it comes to travel and promoting and explaining what the experience is all about, it's really going to be us marketing to AI that is going to create that summary, that's going to create that suggestion, that's going to build that itinerary instead of me really talking and connecting emotionally with that consumer. And that is blowing up the entire marketing world. And just even going from search to AI summaries now, right? AI overviews, that is literally completely adjusting the landscape of how, and that's not just travel, that's everybody, right? Your website now becomes a completely different tool. And there's so much to think about. I mean, we're trying to stay on top of it. We are hoping that we're a little further ahead than others, but the idea of making sure that there are these easy to use concise travel planning tools that are available on your website or in your app on the phone, but still having that human connection, because we are realizing that AI on its own is still not enough. There's still that desire to have that human connection behind as soon as you need one. And that's the thing, you can't wait for it, right? The connection has to step in immediately. And it's that constant, immediate gratification that needs to happen is making I think the job of travel and travel agencies in general, I mean, I'm talking agencies across the board, it's exciting, it's complicated, it's exhilarating, and it's frightening all at once.
That's such a good way to put it, Maria. It's all of those things all at
Yeah.
once. And speaking personally, this is not based on my research, but my friends are using AI to create travel itineraries, packing lists. Which restaurants are we going to go to when we go on our weekend together? So it is amazing how quickly this came in. But I think you're absolutely right. Ever since we have had technology, we have tried to use technology to substitute for that in-person travel experience. Going all the way back to the 19th century, the dioramas, right? There's always been this impulse to create some kind of virtual travel. And it is, it's wonderful, but it has never succeeded in substituting for actual in-person travel or that actual in-person presence. I mean, I can remember when the big promise was that the internet was going to replace the travel agent, because now we would be able to book our own flights, we would be able to book our own hotels, we would be able to do everything ourselves. And we were this promise of all of this personal agency. And it kind of came back around full circle that we don't all necessarily want to do all of that stuff for ourselves. And so I think with the way AI is coming into this space, I'm just speculating right now. Don't quote me on this. This is not based on my research, but I think it's going to unfold in ways that we cannot predict exactly. But I think we can predict that what Maria is saying, the importance of human presence is always going to be a touchstone here.
And I think it's not just, I know that the focus is on the younger generations, and again, we're not going to all age ourselves, but mostly the younger millennials and Gen Zs, absolutely. But I have boomers who are out there AIing all day long when it
Yeah.
comes to travel. And what's interesting, though, Jenny, you made a comment of travel agent, that personal travel agent going away. They're back and forth, and guess who wants them? Gen Z wants them. The younger millennials is who wants them, because I think the influencer world is almost making the world a little complicated. You want all of these things. Yes, there are all these itineraries and all these experiences, and they all look amazing, and you want to Instagram yourself in every one of those spots. And it becomes almost overwhelming. So working with that travel agent, and the key is the travel agent most likely needs to be in the location you're planning. It is not about any travel agent. It's somebody who can book that trip for you and plan it for you as a local. So the whole universe, an ecosystem of travel is imploding and getting turned upside down again. And we're in this crazy, I don't want to call it revolution, but something. And I think we're all trying to find a place for ourselves in the space and an ecosystem. How do we still thrive and continue and succeed in this whole big spot? It's exciting to be in these times.
It is. It's almost like the travel agent can become the next influencer. It's almost like they trust that travel agent from an area of expertise, and they want to speak to a live person that is in that area and can give them advice. That's actually really interesting. I didn't think about the resurgence of the travel agent. I have to call a travel agent now. Uh, I want to kind of bring this to a close and put a bow on it, because there was so much to unpack, and the travel group at Humantel is going to, continue to explore, what drives people to travel. Um, Focusing next on event travel is something we're going to dig into, and the ways in which we're motivated to travel for sporting events, for music, adventure, and so many other pursuits. I just want to thank you, Maria and Jennie. I wish we had a whole additional hour to add to this, because there was so much more to dig into. But thank you so much for sharing, your perspective with our audience, with leisure travel. And I'd like to say to my audience out there, if you did enjoy today's episode, please continue to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and to keep learning about why people make the decisions they make in food, sports, and as today's conversation, leisure, travel, and more. We'll be back next time to share a little bit more human intelligence with our community. Maria, Jennie, thank you so much for your expertise and your input in today's conversation.
Thank you, Lolita.
Thank you.
Everyone else, until then, stay curious. That will do it for today's episode of the Human Tell podcast. Our thanks to all of you who came by to listen. We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast to keep learning about why people make the choices they make in food, sports, travel, and more. We'll be back next week to share a little more human intelligence from our community. Until then, stay curious.